Welcome back, everyone, to another session on CommCon Virtual 2020. This time we're with Sean from the Pion Project. He's going to talk to us about what's been going on with him. First of all, welcome, Sean. Secondly, how's things been for you and the Pion Project through the pandemic? I'm really interested to know people's whether or not there's been an uptick in people getting involved, and what kind of involvement they're actually having. Are people kind of just coming and going, oh, we need this WebRTC thing, or are they kind of getting more involved and wanting to get involved with the actual community around the project?
Yeah, no, well, things kind of worked out perfectly for this. We're expecting a kid in July, so this is like the perfect time to lock ourselves indoors. And so I guess the pandemic kind of lined up for me. But as far as like the Pion community, I've been super excited because there's this initial rush to get this WebRTC stuff out, and so a lot of people were using like hosted services and stuff like that. And so for open source projects, it's been fun because people have been coming to Pion because they want to host their own things, or they have their own interesting creative ideas they want to build that that they can't make happen by like using an external service. So that's been a lot of fun. And then I think in general, just a lot more people have had time to work on their side projects and interesting things. I've been really excited by like the data channels and all those other things that are taking off. So it's been a fun 6 months now at this point of seeing like an uptick. It's crazy that I feel like in early February maybe I started to seeing people trickle in, but yeah, no, it's been a crazy time.
Yeah, we've been seeing an uptick in views on the YouTube channel, more people following us on Twitter, all of that good stuff. It's really interesting to see like the general the average watch time on YouTube went from fairly long to fairly short, and those averages have just been skewed over the past couple of months, where we've suddenly had like this rise in traffic, but people are watching like little bits instead of like a whole 30-40 minute talk. So it's just interesting to see people's behavior. So yeah, Sean is the maintainer of the Pion project. I should have said that earlier. And Pion are actually a sponsor, a silver sponsor of CommCon this year. So thank you very much for supporting the event. And I'm just going to pass it over to Sean, and I'll catch up with everyone afterwards. Cheers.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. And so like a little bit about what Pion is. First off, like Pion is a community project that's made by over like 150 individual contributors. And that's like the super important part, is all these people have taken their time to go make Pion better. A lot of these people, they're spending nights and weekends trying to improve Pion, and like some of them are doing it for work, some of them are doing it for their own individual purposes. And I think that's really fantastic. Like Pion is totally a community project. And talk about exactly what is Pion. Like from a technical side, it's a collection of pure Go RTC libraries. So the most popular one you hear about is the WebRTC. But to do WebRTC, we had to implement all these other things, so like DTLS and SCTP. And then it's even grown farther than that. We now have the Ion project, which is like a full-featured media server that does a lot of interesting things that we'll talk about later. But I think the thing that has really propelled this growth is the fact that it's community-owned. There's no commercial ownership of Pion. Like it is entirely a individual contributor-driven project. You can join if you make a contribution and we merge it, you get a commit bit. That means that you only need one approval from someone else with a commit bit to merge to master. And all communication is on Slack and GitHub. So it's super great to see. We have like a Slack channel with around 950 people now. And of course, a lot of them aren't active, but the ones that are, like, we're having interesting conversations about WebRTC and like what it can do, and things aren't even gated to Pion. So I've been super excited about that. Like that was one of my goals with this project 2 years ago, was how can we build a community and help people share and like find something that they can go home online. So if you're not familiar with WebRTC, I mean, this was like kind of my elevator pitch. Is basically it allows peer-to-peer media and data. And so that means that, if you have a WebRTC process inside your network and your friend has a WebRTC process inside their network, they can communicate directly without a server in the middle. And that's super powerful. But also keeping with that, like, there's no reason that other WebRTC process can't be a server that's sitting on a public IP. It really just means that you have two things that can talk to each other, and it doesn't matter like how they're arranged. And that can exchange multiple media tracks and data. So then you have this existing API that was in the browser, and what Pion has done is brought it to Go. And it's pretty much the same API as the browser. If you're familiar, recall create offer, create answer. But we do have some issues where we are crossing that Go and JavaScript language barrier. There's certain things like type dispatch. In JavaScript, you can have a method that takes, a string or an int. That's not possible in Go in a type safe way. I didn't want to, like cast things and stuff like that. So we have a couple differences. And then the next big thing is the decoupled media and transport. So Pion, it allows you to pass arbitrary audio and video. And that becomes super powerful, and we'll talk about later what that means. And then, like I talked earlier, each subsystem lives in its own package. So the purpose of this talk is, for the past year, we've kind of been talking about what Pion is and what you can do with it. And I have a lot of people, and this year I want to show off like what are the strengths of Pion, and like what were the long-term vision and goals we had, and like how does that help people. So it's all about like the edge cases. So Pion, people are building kind of the normal things in WebRTC, the SFUs, the MCUs, the clients, the protocol bridging. So you see like a lot of security cameras want to, take their RTSP feeds to WebRTC, or you want to take RTMP to WebRTC, or back and forth. Those are all like the normal things you hear about, but I think where software really shines is where you push it to its limits, and you have to figure out like what are the kind of hacky things that you need to do to make it work when you're like stuck in that production code. So a lot of these are like unique solutions we've come up to problems that people have brought to me, and show off the strengths of Go and the strengths of Pion. And many of these stories are still like a work in progress, or I've like only telling a little bit of the story. And not all these things are like, they haven't been proven to like be the actual solution to the problem. But no, I was super excited that like these things worked, and that, it helped unblock people. So the first one, someone came to me, and Pion has a pure Go implementation of DTLS. So that means that we don't use OpenSSL at all. Like, we wrote something that is only in Go. And I think that was super popular for security reasons, like having code in C, like you have this whole breadth of problems that you don't have in Go. And so I thought that was important. But a user came to me and said, like, I had a security review at work, and that's a complete no-go. Like, we can't use your Go implementation of DTLS. Like, we love all your other libraries, but we need OpenSSL. And so, like, we didn't know what to do at first, but this is what ended up happening. Is Go has something called Go modules, and because that we put all of our libraries in separate packages, and they all use the standard library interfaces, which basically says like the Go DTLS is a transport, which means it can read, it can write, and it connect to something. And so that means possibly we could just swap it out. So in Go, we have this type called the con, and it's just a generic stream-oriented network interface, and multiple Go routines may be invoked. So not too exciting yet, but what that means is they could go and just print the public interface of Pion's DTLS implementation, and they could do whatever they want. So what they ended up doing is, in the root of your project, what you can do is if there's any specific component of Pion's DTLS implementation that you don't like, or just any package that we talked about that make up what WebRTC is, you can just replace it. So instead of having to fork the whole Pion project to do, your specific internal project, this top line defines like what your project is. And then that second line is really where all the magic is. So what you're saying is you're replacing Pion's DTLS implementation with your own. So you can say like, I want to use, my fancy OpenSSL version. that's it. As long as you satisfy the public interface of Pion's DTLS implementation, you can switch out. And this is fantastic because it doesn't mean you have to fork. You don't have to fork any other parts of the Pion project. You still get the improvements that happen in ICE and WebRTC and SCTP, and it allows you to keep iterating on your DTLS implementation that's like OpenSSL or something else that you want. And that was able to unblock this project. The next one was the high performance ICE. So I had a user that was running WebRTC on the edge, and it was at like a massive scale. And the CPU usage and just the complexity of ICE was causing them problems. And so what they did is they wrote their own implementation of ICE, and it lived over in its own separate package, and it did all of these very interesting things. But they were able to like just pin it and again do just the go mod replace statement and use a completely different version of ICE. And that was super powerful for them. They could iterate, they could try different things, and they were doing like things that maybe if you were using like a peer-to-peer service would be considered insecure. But for them, they like they did a cost benefit analysis, and like that massive drop in CPU consumption got them closer and closer to like having to run WebRTC at scale was getting closer to the cost of running HTTP at scale, which was super impressive. And they were doing these changes all over the place. And again, like being able to continue to use the latest and greatest is really powerful. If you've ever tried to like modify other projects, you know, like, oh, you can maintain a patch set, or you can try to like poke and prod other pieces, or you can contribute upstream, but there's always like extenuating factors that make that difficult. So I've been really excited to see how much in the Pion community these Go modules have been able to help people. The other is I had a company that came to me and said, like, I want to use Pion, but like I have, 200,000 lines of C code, and it all works really great. And I'm not like, I can't invest in that. What they were able to do is actually compile Pion to C and then just make it a public API out of it. So you can write like your function, like my cool Pion function, and Go allows you to annotate and say like, okay, this simple function takes an int and a char, and that's it. It actually just spits out a header file and a shared object. That's it. Like you can just include that shared object and it just works. Like it'll fire off all of your Go code and you can call it directly from C. So you get like that quick prototyping and that safety in your Go code, but you can still keep your C code and drop it all in one place. And it's super easy. There's no like auto generation step. There's no like, it feels very first class. It's very nice. And then in reverse, you can do the same. Pion can call your C code, and it's not like you have to maintain like JNI or this additional translation layer. It's really just you call like c.my function. But it's not without its costs. The FFI to go from Go to C code is very expensive, and you're like missing out on a lot of benefits of Go. So I wouldn't like recommend this is something you stay with forever, but it's fantastic if you're like quickly trying to iterate and you want to add the power of Go to your existing C projects, or there's a certain library you want to use. I just think it's a fantastic way to unblock yourself. And lots of supported platforms. This is another part that makes Go super powerful. As you look, you have 386 support, AMD 64. I hear from people who are running on ARM and all these MIPS devices. And there's even a project TinyGo, which is trying to run it directly without an operating system. So you have the Go is just, they're trying to solve all these hard problems. And it makes it very easy for a downstream project like me to be able to go and do interesting things. And here's another, so a lot of people, they want to run protocols like SSH or SCTP and things over data channels. So we'll talk about this later, but you have two WebRTC clients and you just want them to send stuff over them. What we ended up doing is, again, like in the standard library, Go has this read-write closer, which basically says this interface, it must satisfy, it must have a read method, it must have a write method, and it must have a close method. And that's been super powerful because you can connect two peer connections together and then you can just give, Go's SSH library or Go's X library the data channel directly, and it'll just go. What I've seen a lot of times is when people bring bugs to me, it's because, you forget to handle an error, or you forget to, measure how much you've read or wrote. And it's really fantastic that you can just plug things together and not have a kind of intermediate step. It's definitely not as powerful as some pure functional language where, everything's perfectly nested. But I've seen a lot of success by not having to write that glue code. And that's where a lot of people's errors come into play. And I think that's I'm excited to see that we don't have to maintain these shims for everything we want to do. We just provide these standard library interfaces, and then all these great libraries just work. Another one that people hit me with a lot is they don't like the peer connection API. There's the performance implications because our API is thread safe. There's a lot of locking and a lot of things that are frustrating because we implement the peer connection API. The people don't like the ergonomics of it. It doesn't feel very Go-like. There's a lot of callbacks. There's a lot of things that don't feel like using. And then, just the common, people come to me and just don't like it. So because Pion is split up into all these individual packages, the WebRTC package that you see at the very top is pretty small. All of the real value lives down in, SCTP or the SRTP. And so you can you don't have to use WebRTC. You can take that, use all these other libraries, and build your own WebRTC implementation that uses a completely different API, and that lets you do a lot of interesting things. I don't know what we'll do long term. There's been lots of conversations that we can have a version of Pion that doesn't use the peer connection API, but it's a tough sell because using the peer connection API removes a lot of arguments from the community that would exist before, because then we'd have to have more ambiguous discussions about what does this API look like? What does that API look like? And it's just not something that I want to have just yet. It's very nice that we focus just on the protocols and not so much the API. So here, now we'll get into just the really weird edge cases. Someone came to me and said, would it be possible that I could connect two peer connections without signaling at all? So that means there's no create offer, there's no create answer, that the browser just connects and it just goes. And so we played with this, and we actually ended up figuring it out with Pion. And what ends up happening is these are all the things you really need. You need the IP and port that you're going to communicate on, you need the ICE credentials, and you need the DTLS fingerprint. And if you're not familiar with deep WebRTC stuff like this, don't worry. It's just more a cool little hack. This is what we ended up doing. Is we run a WebRTC server that listens on all ports. We use a trusted certificate. So just like you would go to a domain register and get, certificate for foo.com, that's what we have on the server, and it's accepted on the client side. And then we use a known ICE password and ICE UFrag. And it just works. It's super interesting, and it opens up a lot of possibilities. A lot of people say oh, it takes a long time to connect over ICE, or oh, it adds some complexity. We're getting closer and closer to being able to simulate, here's a way that we can have two things communicate without having, that back and forth. And so what this user ended up doing, it was an internal project, is they were able to completely get rid of the signaling because they didn't have a possibility to do it. And once the two peer connections were connected, then they would exchange information about codecs and tracks over the data channel. And that allowed us to do a lot of super interesting things by getting rid of that whole step, because they were just in a situation where they couldn't have signaling. And another crazy project that someone came to me, they wanted to have cloud native WebRTC. And the idea was they want to write peer connection code that works on server A. And if server A crashes, server B can take over and handle everything. And this is a massive experiment, and it's still ongoing. But I think it's super cool because you don't have to resort to the tricks of configuring your turn server in a certain way, or the idea is we just want people to throw stuff in Kubernetes and have it just work. And we were really excited about the idea of doing that. And we kind of got there, and it's still a work in progress, but I hope to share it soon. where instead you like share your state in some kind of central caches. So if I'm running my peer connection on server A, I just need to put, my ICE credentials and maybe some state, like about my candidates and my selected candidate in a central store. I need to make my DTLS and SRTP state exportable, which already exist in Pion. And now all of a sudden I can have my RTP sessions move between these pods. And I'm very excited about what this could look like, because this could mean that locally you could write some Go code that says, create new peer connection, create offer, create answer. And your development locally would look the same as it looks in Kubernetes. I hope to get to the point where what people have in the HTTP world, where they just, you scale up 1,000 servers and you scale down 1,000 servers without worrying about any state that's on the individual processing boxes. And that's what we're trying to move towards. And then the last one, that this is very recent, is someone came to me, they wanted to implement application-specific congestion control. And they have a drone with multiple cameras, but they don't just want the WebRTC implementation to automatically lower the bandwidth. So to give people context on this, the way that WebRTC works is it'll measure how much available bandwidth you have, and then it'll lower the bit rate. So if you've ever been on a conference call, you'll notice that someone with a poor internet connection, all of a sudden their video quality will drop. And that's the magic inside WebRTC that will figure that out for you. But what Pion does is it gives you access to the media pipeline, so you can do things however you want. So I can turn off certain cameras, I can lower bitrate for a certain camera first, and this was super powerful for them because they never wanted to lose video quality on the front-facing camera, because that was like the most important thing. But they had like these auxiliary cameras that were maybe just good for debugging, and they would lower the bitrate, and sometimes they turn them off completely. And that's, I think, the thing that makes Pion super powerful for these unique situations. So it's just one of those things that lets you do anything. And like, because you have control of that media pipeline, there's just so many more different things you can experiment with and try. So this is my favorite part of doing these talks, is to talk about like all the unique and interesting things that people are building with Pion. So these are projects out in the open source world that aren't associated with Pion at all. Like, these are all projects that people are owning individually. So the first is NS Remote, or Nintendo Switch Remote. So what this user has done is they're actually sending a video feed from their Nintendo Switch into their Oculus headset. So over WebRTC, they're able to play a Nintendo Switch game. So they're holding the Nintendo Switch in their hand, but they're seeing like a full 3D VR experience, like they're actually playing it. This is super interesting. Like, I think this could open up a lot of interesting things, because right now, instead of having like support each kind of video game platform, or to like plug your Oculus directly into your PC, like, why don't you just stream the video frames over WebRTC? So now you get this like fully immersive experience without having to set up any proprietary software or hardware. And all of a sudden, you have all these different games you can play. So I was super excited to see this. And if you get a chance, when we share the slides, go check out this link, because they also wrote about all the hardware hacks they had to do. And it's a super interesting project. And as you can see, like, you can add all these things like the graphs and stuff. But yeah, these are definitely one of like the most interesting things I've seen people do in a while. So next you have Ion. So Ion is a project that is inside the Pion project. But the idea is that they wanted to build a media server, or WebRTC media server that is designed just for the cloud. And so you see here that like all of these different boxes are each individual node. So you have like a biz node, you have an SFU node, you have a SIP gateway node. And the idea is that if like you're shipping a WebRTC server, you can download the Ion project, which is made up of all these different individual nodes, and you can replace any one of those with your own proprietary logic. So let's say you want to run this giant media server, but you just want to replace the front end. All you have to do is satisfy the public API, but you can swap that out. Or you want to add your own authentication. Or let's say you want to add something special, like in this AV processing node. I see people that are implementing ML stuff. people that are implementing save to disk or transcoding, or they'll send it out to an RTMP server. It's kind of designed with flexibility in mind. We kind of took the ethos of what makes Pion WebRTC and tried to figure out how to bring it to a media server. The next one is the SSH peer-to-peer. So when people talk WebRTC, they love to talk about like the media cases, but this is one that is purely data channel. So if you've ever like started your own basic stuff in the cloud, like let's say you have like 50 servers. You don't want to give them all public IPs because you're worried about the security implications. So what a lot of people will do is they'll only have one server that sits on that only has a public IP, and they'll SSH into that server, and then they'll SSH into the other server. So what this project does is, by using the peer-to-peer aspect of WebRTC, it allows people to connect directly to a server without a public IP. This is super powerful because that means you don't have to leave a server that could be brute forced, and you only initiate the peer connection when you're ready to log in. Like, so it gets rid of all those things. It adds the extra security, and it removes complexity from having to design your systems to worry about like where you'll have a bastion host. CloudRetro. This is a really fun project that's been around for a long time now. It adds the ability to play NES games directly from WebRTC, and at this point, lots of other platforms. But the idea is that you're running an emulator out on a remote server, and you're sending the video frames back to your computer, and you're sending your input via data channels. And this is completely open source. You can download it and run it locally, and it just works. It allows you to do a bunch of fun things, like you can save your save games remote, you can play with other people, and it just adds like a bunch of different possibilities. And it's also like the platforms it's supported on. I love hearing people say like, oh, I want to play this on my iPad or some other device that, it's not like doesn't have a full emulator yet, but allows you to do all these interesting things. Neko is a super interesting project that it allows you to run a full web browser on a remote host that's shared with people. So what you're looking at here is that we're inside of our web browser, we go to localhost 8080, and it's running another full web browser that multiple people can access. So you and your friends could run a server out on the cloud, and then 5 people can watch a YouTube video at once. Or what I'll do is I will leave all my developer docs up on my hosted Firefox instance running out on my DigitalOcean instance. And if I can completely shut down my computer, I can switch between hosts. I have multiple computers that I work on, and that allows me to keep all of my browser state in one place that I don't have to worry about. So it doesn't take up CPU usage. I don't have to worry about switching, between instances, and it allows me to do a bunch of interesting things. And the latency is amazing. Like the fact that you can watch a YouTube video and hear the audio and everything it feels like you're using something locally. So if you get a chance, check it out. This is a super interesting project. And then recently, Pion was used in a WebTorrent project, which another super interesting thing is now you can do peer-to-peer torrenting directly in your browser. So you can open up a tab and you can start exchanging a video file with thousands of other peers. And that lowers the bar to what it takes to like the free exchange of information. And I'm excited about what that means for things like Wikipedia and other of these that are very expensive to host. If you have the possibility of not having to pay for expensive servers to share that data, I think that opens up a lot of possibilities. And then by making WebTorrent available outside of the browser, now you can run a Go process that's super cheap and have all these browsers connect to it and share files, so you can run like a dedicated WebTorrent seed box. And I think that will open up a lot of interesting possibilities, and it'll just make the WebTorrent healthier. Snowflake, I think, is a super important project, and it was actually one of the things that I wanted to support most when we first started this project. We had the Tor has this project where you can do censorship circumvention via the browser. So if you are in, network A, you can make your network connection available to other people via the data channel, so they can connect and share and like access sites and view stuff that they wouldn't be able to do before. And what's really powerful about it is the fact that there's no additional downloads. So you don't have to solve that problem of, oh, how do I get access to this executable? when I'm not able to be on the open internet in the first place, which opens up a bunch of interesting things. And then the next is like these drone projects, which I always love is, so here a user is using WebRTC to send messages and control this drone just by dragging and dropping events in this web UI. And it, just the fact that it makes like the controls available from somewhere, you can now all of a sudden you can use it in Chromium and Firefox and all these different projects. It makes the usability of these things so much greater, not having to have a download. And then Pion itself, like just to like demonstrate like how powerful it is it doesn't even have to run in the browser. You can like have two people that are talking directly to each other right from the terminal. So this is me talking to someone else, and our video is captured and then rendered via ASCII. And the fantastic company called Dial-Up was the one that built this project. And then the last one is the web wormhole. So one of the big problems is like still today is like, how do I share a file with a friend? So you can upload it, but then you have to worry about like your data at rest in another place, or you have projects that you could share files via WebRTC already, but the issue was that it only works browser to browser. And WebRTC isn't supported everywhere, or you just didn't want to leave your browser open or something like that. Well, someone created Web Wormhole. And Web Wormhole is a file sharing that crosses the native and the web boundary. So I can go to Web Wormhole and I can create a wormhole and I can share a file from my browser to a Go process that runs on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And in the inverse, like someone could share a file from my Mac to my Linux computer without opening the browser at all. So it's fantastic that this crosses that boundary. And then the other cool thing is that Go runs in lots of places. So it's not out of the possibility that you could create a web wormhole client that runs on Android, that runs on your iPhone, that runs on an embedded ARM device. There's just a lot of different things you can do here. So my last ask for you is like, Pion needs you. Hopefully you saw like a couple of these projects, especially like Tor and IPFS, are super important to the internet. And it's a great place to learn. WebRTC, it's a small community, and there's a lot of niche knowledge that not a lot of people have, but here's a chance to come join this and learn these things. Like we're constantly trying to play catch up with these projects that have existed for 10 years longer than Pion. So it's a fun challenge and there's lots to do. So we'd love to have you join. And then these are all the places you can find us. So I think the most important one to get in would probably be the GitHub project. So if you go to github.com/Pion, the WebRTC and all the other libraries are available there. And we do all of our project management on GitHub. So we have release notes. We have like, these are our big ideas. If you get a chance, browse around our wiki. Like pretty much we throw all our musings in there and try to make them available. We have the Slack channel that I'm available in all the time. If you go in there, I get a notification. Everyone sends a message. And so like I try to help people and talk and, pretty much anything. Like all conversations are welcome. They don't have to be about Pion. If you just want to talk about general WebRTC, we'd love to have you. And then the Twitter. Really what I do most of the time with that Twitter account is just try to share the open source projects that other people are using. If you go to that Twitter, there's also a link in the bio to Awesome Pion, which is a place where I record all the interesting projects people have built with Pion. So it's a great place to go look and see what other people are building, and it'll inspire you and you can see what's possible. So that's it. I hope to see you soon in our Slack channel.
Thank you so much, Sean. Wow. Don't know where to start. I don't need to buy a newer Mac anymore to take care of like my 100 Chrome tabs. I can just use Neko. That's crazy. I'd seen that project, but I'd never seen it like actually be used. That's really cool. So many great projects using Pion. Wow. Like me and Sean met last year at last year's CommCon. He came and did a talk about Pion, and had great fun on segways and other things in the evening. And the project's come on huge like in the past year. Like I remember watching last year's talk and going, oh, this is cool. This is different. Like anyone that knows me knows I love the data channel. I'm always talking to Tim Panton about the data channel and how it's the like forgotten part of WebRTC and how it can be used hugely and people just aren't using it. So A, it's lovely to see people actually, using it, and B, it's awesome to see an open source project like Pion kind of grow as much as it has in the past year. So we're going to head over to Riot over at riot.commcon.xyz. Go make an account, or if you're already there, then we'll see you there soon for our Q&A, where you'll be able to ask Sean any question you want. I think that's pretty much it. Other than saying thank you again for sponsoring, you've helped enable all of this to happen. So thank you very, very much for joining in and taking your time to talk. So I'm going to say goodbye there. We'll see you over at the Q&A on Riot. The description is in the link. No, the link is in the link is in the description below. Cheers. Don't go anywhere quite yet, though. We've got to say thank you to all of our sponsors. Without them, none of this would have even happened in the first place. So for our platinum sponsors, we've got Toulouse, Voxbone, and Sierra. For our gold sponsors, we've got the Matrix Foundation, Vonage, Sangoma, Telviva, and Loway. Our silver sponsors are Applicationspecific, Pion, Telco Bridges with ProSVC, Avoxy, 8x8 with Jitsi, and FirstCom Europe. And we've also got community sponsors, QXIP and Cycol Systems. Without any of them, this would never have even happened. You wouldn't have had all of this free content on YouTube. So go say thank you to all of them. Go look at what they provide, what services they offer, and have a conversation with them all over on Riot, riot.commcon.xyz. The link will be in the description below, along with links to all of our sponsors. You can go and watch preview videos from all of our gold sponsors right now over on YouTube. The links will be somewhere over here. All I've got to say is thank you to all of our sponsors, and I'll see you over on the Q&A shortly. Cheers.